Welcome to Richplanet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. This week I will be presenting the fourth and final audience discussion show, and the subject on the agenda is the secret space program and UFOs. Joining me for the discussion is the man you can't keep off richplanet.net, the unsung hero of modern-day ufology, possessing a mind of useful information, veteran UFO researcher David Cayton. Welcome, David.
Thank you very much, Richard.
Now, 2 weeks ago, we had another one of these releases of government secret files, and I think if you watch my show, you'll be aware of my opinion of them. I believe that they're nothing more than disinformation, because there are no top secret files in these files, and I'm fairly sure there are UFO files which are secret. But you've had a look at them, David, and you wanted to highlight a couple of very significant points in them.
Yes, I've only had a very quick look in the last day or so. Dr. David Clarke, who many people know, has become a sort of fixture now at the PRO at Kew, which is the Public Records Office, and he's sort of coordinated these batches of files that they release every, I don't know, 6 or 9 months. And he's done a sort of resume of what he considers to be the highlight and the most interesting items. So I've just printed that off and looked through them, and there are a few what I would call slight anomalies with facts.
Before you go to the first one, David, I just want to remind everyone about the 1957 Milton Torres case. That wasn't covered in these files, but this is where a US Air Force fighter jet pilot was ordered to shoot down a UFO flying around above Suffolk.
Yeah.
Now, that case is, well, Milton Torres has given a lot of information on that case, but I didn't realise until recently that in August 1956, a US Air Force fighter jet pilot was vectored to go and intercept a UFO.
Well, no, it was an Air Force, a Royal Air Force pilot.
Royal Air Force pilot.
But it was a USAF base in Suffolk called Lakenheath, who had this object on radar, which was obviously confirmed by one of the early warning radar stations called Neatishead, which is in Norfolk. And they scrambled 2 RAF Venom fighters from RAF Waterbeach in Cambridgeshire to intercept, just like the Milton Torres case.
Very similar. Just
a year before. Although I couldn't get any information from the MOD, having filed the Freedom of Information Act on the Torres case, because they said they didn't have any records of that incident, and here we are on this release of documents. Is a 1956 case. So
this is Flight Lieutenant, we think he was, Davis,
yes,
who witnessed and got a lock-on of the UFO.
Yes, he was the pilot of one of the Venoms, yes.
So can you tell us what he said about the dynamics that he viewed on his radar of this UFO?
That's not actually in the report. Well, it might be, I don't, but not in the detail I've got here. But he certainly got a radar lock-on, and he took some footage on his, what they call a gun camera. And this was shown actually to a Nick Pope predecessor, a fellow called Ralph Noyes, who was on the UFO desk when it was called DS8, I think. In 1970, he was shown a secret briefing of various UFO footage, including this footage taken by Flight Lieutenant, or it might have been a flying officer, Davies, in 1956, in August 56.
Do you know if that footage has been released, David? Or?
Ooh, I shouldn't think so.
Okay. and apparently this Davis, who was flying the craft and witnessed the UFO, he became the first official MOD spokesperson on UFOs in 1971, I believe. Yes,
there was he was now at a rank of Air Commodore, which is quite a way up from when he was flying the Venom in 56, and he was a front man on a TV debate for BBC.
It was the Man Alive programme.
Man Alive programme, yes.
1972.
Yeah, 72. So.
But this guy Davis, he'd witnessed. Apparently, the radar report said that it was in front of him, and then suddenly it was behind him.
Yes, I mean that's pretty incredible, isn't it?
So. Can you just expand on that, David? What did the radar report say?
Well, he had it in front of him. He was chasing behind the UFO, obviously, at some point, Next thing, it disappears off his cockpit radar, and the air traffic control and the radar people, whether that was Neatishead or Lakenheath, said, "Oh, it's behind you." And he said, "Oh, no, it wasn't." "Oh, yes, it is." You know, the pantomime thing. And in a blink of an eye, the object had gone behind his jet and was trailing behind him.
And we'll see some evidence of that a little bit later on in the interview. OK, so this guy appears on this TV show, but he seemed to put cold water on previous statements that he'd made in the past.
Yeah.
Once he'd become the government spokesperson.
Yeah. To give him, he was Air Commodore Davies, DFC, DSO, a distinguished Second World War fighter pilot. And after he retired, he joined the MOD as a civilian. He died in 1986, and he had two personal UFO experiences, one while flying a Spitfire in 1944, and of course the second one in the scrambled RAF Venom fighter in August 1956. Anyway, they obviously had some discussion about the politics of this programme, and despite his previous first-hand experiences of intercepting or seeing two UFOs, they came up with this sort of governmental UFO policy in a pre-recorded studio debate. So in other words, it was pre-recorded, so they were making sure what was said was fitted in with what the MOD wanted to say. Now, whether he personally felt this or not, which is a bit strange considering his personal experiences, and it says here, the policy, the MOD policy, as a result of, this is inverted commas, the need felt by many people for a new mythology, and hence their willingness to believe that natural things or events may have mysterious or extraterrestrial origins, close of italics. So in other words, here is this man mouthing these words, the very pilot who chased the UFO. Now, he may have been ordered to say that and make that statement. But
all right, David, well, let's come on to another case in the files which you've got some inside information on, and that's the case in 1990 where these flying triangles were flying around above Belgium, and they were causing all sorts of problems for the Belgian Air Force. They couldn't catch them. They were all over the place. They were now, it says in the UFO files released that this incident remains unresolved. Now, I believe that the Belgian MOD actually enlisted an expert who was a professor in radar technology to examine the airborne radar tapes and to see, you know, what the dynamics of these objects and analyse it. So, Emile Schweitzer, I think it's called.
He's a professor of radar and optronics at Brussels University. So he was co-opted and presumably paid by the Belgian Defence Ministry, which is like our MOD, and their Air Force, the Belgian Air Force, and they wanted to get an independent view on the radar responses of the tracks of this UFO.
Just before you go on there, David,
sure.
Can you tell us what the actual files that they've released say about the Belgian case? Well, there's not a great deal, is there? It doesn't mention this guy, this professor.
No.
It doesn't mention him.
No, I haven't read.
That's not in the files.
The main bulk of this item is just this little paragraph here with the DFE number to read, which is about 5 pages long, which is mainly the account of the events by the Belgian Air Force Colonel Wilfred de Brouwer, a senior official in the Belgian Air Force, and he just says, last remark, it remains unresolved. So in other words, the Belgian Air Force weren't saying it could be this, it could be that. It was unresolved. Now, the MOD have constantly say publicly and to people who write and have written over the years that it is not our remit to investigate UFOs. We just, unless there's some significant defence significance, I should say is the word they use, we're not interested, we're not funded, we don't have the staff to do it. And then, lo and behold, some 15 months, I believe, after this event, there's an ex-retired solicitor called Harry Harris, who lived in Sale, he still lives in Sale in Manchester, found out that Professor Schweitzer was in the UK, in London, and he found out which hotel he was in, and he agreed to be interviewed on Harry's domestic video recorder.
But he had come over to London,
yes.
Professor Schweitzer, specifically to speak to the MOD.
Yes. No,
about the Belgian case 15 months earlier.
That's right. Now then, Schweitzer made it quite clear to Harry he didn't want to record on his tape why he was in London. He didn't want it to be publicly known, and we're going back now
1991.
20 years, yeah. That at the public expense, he'd been flown over from Belgium to be debriefed by the MOD, and maybe MOD, Air Force, radar specialists to do whatever. Now, the Belgian Air Force, or their Department of Defence, were keen to have this independent man who specialised in the radar to see if he could fault the radar. This is the airborne radar tapes off 2 F-16s from the Belgian Air Force. He was also asked to interview the 2 pilots, which he did. And basically, he could not fault the radar tapes to be some radar anomaly, or Doppler effects they can get, ground reflection effects, birds, all the sort of common radar problems. So he agreed to be interviewed by Harry in London, and what he says and his demeanour and body language and everything is very revealing.
So we're going to have a look at Professor Emile Schweitzer now in the interview. Now it's quite low quality because it's just recorded on a camcorder in, I think, 90 or 91 by Harry Harris.
And it's
so
a copy as well.
We're going to crank up the VHS.
Organized a meeting at the in a big room of the Society in Brussels, and they asked me to be present at that meeting, and I was present at that meeting together with my colleague Professor Acharois, who is a specialist of image processing. That's the first time I heard about UFOs. I didn't believe anything about UFOs beforehand. They asked me to be there because they heard that I am a radar specialist, and they asked my colleague Marc Acharois to be there because they heard he was a very good specialist of image processing.
Yeah.
So that's the way I got involved, as well as my colleague Marc Acharois.
Yes. Now, have you actually spoken to any of the pilots who had sightings of?
Yes, I have spoken to the pilot and my colleague too, and also Mr. Brennick, Leon Brennick, which is a physicist of the Brussels University, and which is a member of the SOBAPS. We spoke all three with the pilot because we gave a conference about the UFO appearances in the eastern part of Belgium, in a small town called Welkenraad, in the month of, at the end of the month January, and the pilot who recorded very carefully the UFO trajectory in the night of 30 March was present.
Well, what year was that? The 19th of March, what year? 1990.
So the recording by an F-16 aircraft of a UFO trajectory very accurately occurred in the night of 30 March 1990. But we spoke, my colleague Professor Acharois, Mr. Brennick from the University of Brussels, and myself, we spoke to that pilot at the end of January this year, when we gave a conference about UFO appearances in a small town called Welkenraad.
Yes. Yeah. And what have you discovered about the phenomenon since you started researching, being involved in it?
Oh, I didn't discover it. I must say that the biggest discovery, the trajectory of the UFO, is entirely due to two engineers from the Belgian Air Force. They have been instructed by the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Belgian Air Force to calculate very accurately the UFO trajectory using the data recorded by the F-16 pilot on 30 March 90. The names of those two engineers are Lieutenant Colonel Salmon and Lieutenant Gilmar. And the biggest work has been done, of course, by the youngest officer, Lieutenant Gilmar.
Yes.
And normally, the results of the very strange trajectory followed by the UFO should be given by those two engineers to the Chief of Staff of the Belgian Air Force at the beginning of April '92. So
it doesn't matter any time.
Any time, yes.
Yes. I mean, can you tell us anything what you know of it?
I know that because I know those two young engineers, and I know what I found by calculations starting from the data recorded by the pilot, that the UFO made at one point of his trajectory a very strange motion. And during that very strange motion, the normal acceleration was, let's say, above 30 Gs. It means an acceleration which is far beyond the possibilities of human beings and human present technology.
Now, was this where it turned at right angles?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you show the diagram? If I can...
Maybe I can write the...
Right, okay, I'll just zoom out a little bit, I've gone too close. Right, okay, far away.
Okay?
Yes.
So, the trajectory was, first of all, the UFO was flying almost level, and then suddenly made a 90-degree motion. At that point, where he made a 90-degree turn, that point, the normal acceleration was above 30 Gs. Climbed almost vertically, and then descended obliquely to the ground. During the oblique descent, the UFO was flying supersonic at a speed of about 900 knots, and it disappeared from the radar of the F-16 lost the UFO when the UFO was reaching almost the ground. But at that moment, the UFO was observed visually by Belgian gendarmes. It means Belgian members of the Belgian state police.
I see. Now, when it did the acceleration at about 30 Gs, what's the maximum acceleration that a human being could withstand?
I would say about the maximum acceleration which is allowed by an F-16. And that maximum acceleration is 9 Gs. You know, some F-16 pilot find that an acceleration of 9 Gs is very painful.
Yes, yes. So, is it reasonable to assume that there couldn't have been anything living in that machine, that UFO, as we understand life?
I would say that with the present human technology, that's impossible.
Yes. Could it be that that machine was robotic, perhaps artificial intelligence? Do you think?
That's possible.
It's it is within the realms of possibility.
Yes.
Tell us how all this sort of information came to come out. What is the attitude of your government and your Air Force, your Ministry of Defence on these matters?
It's not an attitude of the government. It's just an attitude of the Minister of Defence, yes, of the time where the UFO appearances started. It means in the beginning of the year 1990. The Minister of Defense at that time was Mr. E. Komen, and he very surprisingly compared with other Ministers of Defense from other countries beforehand. He decided that the Belgian Air Force had to be very open and very frank speaking. And he ordered the Belgian Air Force to be very open, and they were really very open afterwards.
Yes, I found them very open myself. I mean, they put me on to you, as opposed to the British Ministry of Defence and British Air Force, Royal Air Force. Do you see a difference in attitude between your Air Force, your Ministry of Defence, and that of Great Britain and the United States of America?
Yes.
Can you be more specific?
I can be more specific because I never heard, I never saw the same attitude from the Minister of Defense from USA or from Great Britain or from France. All what is known about UFO appearances in those big countries is that, for instance, when I read the paper you give me, the relation by Milton Torres and the other American pilots, they each time ordered that the observations had to be very secret.
Yes.
And the pilot had to forget anything about what he has seen.
Yes, yes, yes.
And that's entirely different from the attitude of the Belgian Minister of Defense,
Yes.
Mr. Giscombe, and the attitude, of course, the consequent attitude, or the subsequent attitude of the Belgian Air Force and of the Belgian pilots.
Yes, yes. Why do you think this is, the difference in attitude between your government, your country, and Britain and America? I mean, clearly it's a marked difference in attitude.
I'm not quite sure of what I am going to say, but maybe it's because of the Minister of Defense.
This guy, this Professor David,
Yeah.
he went over to the UK and was interviewed by the MOD.
Yes,
Yes.
he was sort of debriefed.
Right, and that's not in the files.
No, and he was...
So why isn't it in the files?
Yeah, quite. And he didn't want Harry, when he introduced him at the start of the interview, which we haven't seen, he made it quite clear before the camera was running, he didn't want it known that he was over here to be interviewed by our own radar specialist in the MOD.
Okay, well, we'll be talking more about the liars at the MOD after this short break, David. Welcome back. I'm talking to David Cayton about UK UFO cases, and I mentioned Rendlesham Forest before the break, David. It's probably the most famous case in the UK, and many books have been written about it, Sky Crash being one of them, You Can't Tell the People another, and these books are pretty conclusive in the fact that this was a genuinely unexplained event. This UFO left impressions in the ground, which were, you know, there were impressions were taken, and, you know, Jim Penniston actually touched this craft. It was witnessed by over 50 airmen. Now, when I was at the Exopolitics conference a few weeks ago, this article appears in the Daily Telegraph, and it's basically about the US commander who was in charge of the base at the time, who's not spoken for 31 years about the Rendlesham case. He's suddenly trying to debunk the case, and I'll just quote here. He said Charles Holt was the deputy commander, and he has made extensive statements about this being a genuine structured craft.
Yeah, I should explain there was two bases. There's Bentwaters and Woodbridge, just a mile or two apart. Two colonels, there's Colonel Williams and Conrad. I'm not sure which base they were in charge of. And Holt was the deputy base commander, and Williams instructed Charles Holt to write the memo, the famous memo in 1981 in February, to our MOD, explaining what had happened. And Colonel Conrad at the time didn't have a lot to say publicly, but Charles Holt has responded to that journalist at the Telegraph.
I'll just read out his quote. So this was in the Telegraph.
Yeah.
We saw nothing that resembled Lieutenant Holt's descriptions, either in the sky or on the ground. Colonel Conrad is scathing about his former deputy. He should be ashamed and embarrassed by his allegations that his country and England both conspired to deceive their citizens over this issue. He knows better. So this guy's not really gone on record, and suddenly he's brought out 31 years later, and he's saying this. And, you know, I mean, what do you think's going on here, David? Why? I mean, I know Gary Heseltine, who's probably done more research on anyone on this case, he was, you know, he was incensed by this article.
Well, it would be, because Gary has done a film script about Rendlesham with agreement and alongside Colonel Holt, who has put his input in as Gary went along to make sure the facts were correct. So what's triggering the government now to persuade Colonel Conrad over in the States to say all these contradictory statements, really accusing his fellow Colonel Williams, never mind Charles Holt, of effectively lying? I mean, I can't... But what the motive is, I don't know. I mean, have they sort of threatened his pension or something? But why, after all this time, has he done that?
Mm-hmm. And Dr. David Clarke, who you mentioned earlier, who is responsible for writing the executive summary of the UFO files, he's quoted in this article. Dr. Clarke, who is a skeptic on UFO issues, believes Lieutenant Colonel Holt saw some form of optical illusion. Okay, so you know, this is Dr. Clark now pouring cold water on the case as well. And if we just stick on Clark for a little while, because he also tried to debunk the Milton Torres case from 1957, when he brought up Project Palladium.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that, David?
Yeah. Well, that shook me. I'd never heard of this secret Project Palladium, which was an American thing they were playing around with, was to produce false radar signals in the air to fool enemy pilots and enemy radar, so that they would scramble and waste their resources sending aircraft off to intercept an enemy, which was literally a ghost radar signal in the sky. Now, how did David Clark get to know about Project Palladium? First off, I couldn't imagine he would have picked it up just at random, so somebody has briefed Clark to come out with that. So I went into the internet and Googled it and ended up with Wikipedia and found that palladium was not actually used for the first time for real till 3 years later, till 1960, and it was operated and trialled in Germany into the eastern sector of Germany, still when Germany was divided. So in other words, the Americans tested it over there, not over Suffolk or the North Sea in 1957. So why was this introduced? And in my view, it was introduced to diminish and water down the importance of 2 American pilots based on British soil, authorised to fire between them 48 Mighty Mouse missiles in our airspace from RAF Fighter Command HQ at Bentley Priory.
And,
so I mean,
and Torres was debriefed, and he was told,
yeah,
he was reminded of his official secrets,
yes,
and he was, you know, told not to speak about the event,
yes,
basically. And if he hadn't spoken about the event in the late 1980s,
yeah,
it probably wouldn't have been, no one would probably know about the case.
No, he was warned by an American who came from London to the base in Kent in Manston, and him and his wingman were both interviewed separately, and this guy was from the NSA, the National Security Agency, and was warned this was top secret and classified, you mustn't talk about it, not even to his wing commander, his base commander in Manston.
Okay, David, I'd like to throw it open for anyone to ask questions or make any comments at all. Do we have anyone in the audience who wants to be the first to speak? Yes, sir.
About the Milton Torres case, I'm interested in... sorry, I didn't wait for the microphone. The deciding to shoot down a UFO, I wonder what you guys thought about, you know, the thinking behind that. You know, do you think that was a standing order just to get hold of craft at any cost? What do you think about that?
I just think they're a bunch of arrogant fools.
Well,
that's my answer. But
yeah,
it just sounds totally bizarre, just as something, you know, shoot it down. You know.
I mean, you've got to bear in mind there'll be rules of conflict firmly laid down. We're in the height of the Cold War in 1957, and the Americans were employed to do the scramble because they had the fastest jet in the UK at the time. Could go faster than the Hunters, or the Venom certainly was slow by comparison. So they scrambled these 2 guys who were looking after what they call Met sector, the metropolitan sector, which covered the London area and the southeast. So there was 2 reasons why they were scrambled, not the Royal Air Force. And Torres was horrified, and he was shut rigid when he got this coded order to fire his 24 Mighty Mouse missiles. He pointed out that it was over our airspace, and by comparison, just going back to Rendlesham for a minute, Colonel Holt and all his men who went into the forest, they stepped off the base, and when they stepped off the base, they had to leave a guy with a truck and take all the sidearms off and leave their weapons in the truck. They couldn't even take a firearm into our territory, because once they've crossed over the fence into the forest, they're in the UK. So here we have, as a contrast, the Royal Air Force Fighter Command at Bentley Priory, which I reckon where the executive order came from, and it would have to come from a high rank, you know, it wouldn't be just a controller at Bordsey Manor, who was the GCI for Torres and his friend, or even down the bunker in Essex, where they'd been, to fire these weapons on our airspace, and also loose off very expensive ordnance. You think of the cost of doing that. So Torres was like a 26-year-old lieutenant at the time. He says in his testimony, I almost shit my pants. And he shut the lights down in the cockpit, and he's trying to check this order on a notepad on his flying suit knee that he got, and he challenged it to check he got it right, and they confirmed he must fire his rockets. Any other questions or even comments? All right, we'll plough on with these files, because there's another thing. There's one section of it entitled "Bogus UFO Stories by National Press." You had a comment you wanted to make about that, David? Oh yeah, yeah. This is again the MOD having a pop at the media. In this case, the media were apparently doing the right thing. I don't know. There was a printed media coverage of UFOs between 1996 and 2002. In April 1998, 2 national newspapers, which are not specified, claimed that radars at the early warning radar station RAF Farlingdales in North Yorkshire had tracked a UFO as big as a battleship, moving at speeds between 17,000 and 24,000 miles per hour over the North Sea. The story claimed that Dutch F-16 fighters had been scrambled, and tapes of the incident would be presented at a conference hosted by RAF Cranwell, Lincolnshire. Labour's Under-Secretary of State for the MOD at the time was John Speller, MP, saw the articles and asked for a briefing from the MOD. He was told the source of the story was a freelance journalist who was known to be rather inventive of the facts. They had a separate note from Farlingdales itself, RAF Farlingdales, who confirmed that no UFOs had ever been tracked by the station during its 35-year history. And that mentions another file number reference there. Now,
you reckon that can't possibly be true, David?
Yes, I mean, the UK NORAD, people know about NORAD in the States, we've got 3 radar early warning stations, one up at Staxton Wold in near Scarborough, there's Farlingdales, and there's Neatishead in Norfolk. And we've just heard that Neatishead in 1956 had on tape, on radar, the UFO that the Venoms were scrambled to search in 1956. So I do not accept that Farlingdales, unlike Neatishead or Staxton Wold, can't see anything that's coming into our airspace, because they see everything.
So it's possible that that entire story is actually true, and that the statement's been put out, you know, to debunk it?
Yes, yeah.
Okay then, Dave. Well, I'm going to change the subject now. If viewers of this show will be aware of what is termed false flag terrorism, we've covered that a lot, and it's my belief that both the 9/11 and 7/7 events were contrived events. They were carried out by shady groups within the military. Now, but before these 2 events, I believe that there was predictive programming put out in the media. So several months before 9/11 occurred, there was a drama which envisioned terrorists flying planes into the World Trade Center. And about a year before the 7/7 attacks, we had a panorama documentary which envisioned almost exactly what happened in the 7/7 London bombings. And, you know, psychologists will tell you that this is predictive programming, that they're putting these ideas out there so that when they happen, they're more likely to be accepted by the public. Now that I've stated that, I'm going to now introduce another article by one of our mainstream newspapers that was in the paper the other day, the 18th of August. Aliens may destroy humanity to protect other civilizations, say scientists. Okay, so you know what I'm going to say next.
Who are these scientists?
Well, who are the scientists, yeah. But, you know, and there's been more than one of these type of articles sort of trying to fearmonger about aliens that are going to come and invade us. I think, is it Michio Kaku, the famous physicist, he has made comments that aliens may be hostile. I mean, and then we've got, but on this, you know, a couple of days before that, we've got they're debunking Rendlesham. So, I mean, what do you think's going on, David? I mean, do you think this could be predictive programming, these sort of stories, that there's something going to happen?
That's on the cards, I think, yeah.
You think it's on the cards? Yeah. I mean, Ian Crane has spoken about this, the fake alien invasion at the Olympics. And, you know, we're all called crackpots for actually suggesting this. Does anyone have a comment on this type of article?
Yeah, don't forget, this was in National Geographic, which is a science-type paper in America, and also the History Society. This announcement earlier this year that the Pentagon is preparing for and anticipating a space war. And we've also can't miss a terrific lot of films coming out of alien attack, portraying them as menacing. So this is quite definitely some new strategy coming from America, I would say, maybe to ratify Star Wars programs or whatever.
I would just like to say what I can't square up with, Nick, is if alien zones exist because they're now debunking Rendlesham, that wasn't an alien event. If they were trying to do what Richard and people are suggesting, they've got to prove to the public psyche that aliens exist in the first place. Otherwise, what's the point of saying these unknown, non-existent beings are a danger to us? You know, it doesn't stack up to me.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Madam Hedda.
Well, in my opinion, it's kind of preparing the masses for globalization, because an alien threat would then mean that the world has to pull together.
Okay.
And use this in a bad way. It would bring the one world order down one step closer.
Okay. It's rather ironic that if it does happen and it is fake, it's going to be the ufologists telling everyone that it's not a real UFO. And any other comments?
Well,
yes, Nick,
just
go on.
in general, the Empire wants people to live in fear. They're always creating fear images. Now, if you remember the new millennium, there was this terrific hype about the bug. Everyone's scared shitless about this bug, which turned out not really to exist.
Tell me about it. Yeah.
Now we've got 2012, but everyone's getting apocalyptic stories and rumours and hopes and mythologies, and perhaps by putting this in, they're just trying to get their mentality of fear around this event, so that people have something to be frightened about.
Sure. Okay, well, we're going to go for a short break, and joining us after the break is Richard Lennie, who has researched allegations that NASA, which is a military organisation, has a secret space program that most of its own employees are completely unaware of. Welcome back, and we are now joined by Richard Lennie. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you very much.
Now you have done a lot of research with night vision goggles.
That's right.
You've also researched a lot of NASA images. So you're friends with Ed Grimsley, and people may know him from the series UFO Hunters, and I believe it was he who introduced you to the night vision technology.
Yes, it was, yeah.
So how long have you been using night vision goggles to look at the sky?
Well, for about 2.5 years I've been using them, ever since I discovered Ed on the internet. He has his phone number, and you can phone him up and talk to him, which is exactly what I did do, seeing as I was interested in the subject of UFOs. And he explained for about 2 hours on the phone to me about he was seeing UFOs through night vision, and he was seeing craft that when you put the night visions down, you don't see them. They're not there at all. But as soon as you put the night visions back up, they're there. So I found this extremely interesting. So.
Okay, so tell us, first of all, what are these infrared or UV?
Yeah, they're infrared, but you don't have to have the infrared on, as I discovered when I purchased mine, because I assumed that the reason you couldn't see them with your naked eye was because they were hidden in the infrared spectrum. That's what I assumed, but I discovered afterwards that's not the case. It's the fact they're digital. It's the digital part of it that produces the image onto the screen, which enables you to see the craft, but your own eye, your optics, cannot see it.
Right. And Ed was over here recently.
Yeah, he came over to see me. He stayed with me for 2 weeks.
Okay.
He brought his night visions over. Now, he brought Generation 3s, which aren't illegal in this country, but he brought them anyway.
They are illegal?
No, they're illegal.
Oh, they're illegal?
Yeah, but he brought them over because...
Why are they illegal?
Well, we don't know. They just are. There's basically 4 generations, 1 to 4, 3 and 4 are military, 1 and 2 are just standard basic stuff.
And you recommend that you must get at least Generation 2 upwards? Generation 1?
All it is, as you go through the range, the more generation you go, the more light comes into the optics, and of course the clearer the image, and the further you can see out into space.
Okay. So tell us, first of all, what shapes have you seen, and how often have you observed them?
Well, on a clear night, because you obviously need a clear night, I see them most nights. I can go an hour or so out there. Believe it or not, you've got to be out there for a while sometimes, but and I don't see anything more than satellites, shooting stars, space debris, and then all of a sudden you'll get a shape coming across the sky. It's sort of like see-through, and you usually find the ones that seem to be see-through are the ones that you don't see with the naked eye, and he'll zoom across quite fast, but he'll make erratic turns, like curveball around and stuff like that. Now, of course, to begin with, I thought I was just seeing bugs, but I wasn't, because these were higher up, and as I discovered later on, they've got structure to them as well.
And I believe Ed has footage on his website, and you're working to try and record some.
That's correct, yeah. He calls them delta wings. I call them scout ships, but you can actually see a little wing at the back. And he says there's a battle going on up in space as we speak. He has recordings of it, although he's been told and no circumstances to show it by certain people. But he has the videotape, and he's got it at home. I've yet to see it, but I have seen starts of battles.
All right.
I've not actually seen, but he says you see the whole thing. You see them like firing a plasma ray, you see them blowing up, you see the debris, you see everything.
Okay, and what sort of shapes are these objects that you see?
Oval, or spheres, mainly oval.
Okay, and you were telling me that on a few occasions you've seen triangles.
Yeah, I've seen triangles. Mainly, most of them are spheres. They just look like stars.
Okay, and you think that some of the triangles might be secret American craft?
Could be,
the TR-3B or something like that?
It could be that back-engineered stuff that I'm seeing.
Okay, so what would you say to a skeptic who just says, well, these are probably just terrestrial test aircraft?
They say that. They say they're satellites. Obviously, we know what satellites look like. They go at a certain speed. Some go slow, some go fast, and they always go in a straight line. And that's basically satellites.
What about aircraft?
Yeah, aircraft's got flashing lights. I mean, you can see an aircraft, even if it's up really high, it'll blink slightly. Or again, it'll basically keep in a sort of straightish line.
So you're saying that Grimsley's got footage which he's not allowed to show?
No, he's been told not to show the battles, the actual part of them fighting, but he's got everything else, which you can see on the internet anytime you go on there.
Right, it's pretty incredible. So I mean, does he have a theory on what he thinks is actually going on?
Yeah, he says there's a battle going on as far as he can see. From what he's gathered information, it looks like there's a craft up there that seem to hang around and wait. They literally look like a star, and then all of a sudden, if you happen to be in the right part of the sky, you'll just see it starting to move down. And you think, hang on, that was stationary a minute ago, and it does literally start to move down. And then you'll think, okay, what's it looking at? And then you'll go down, and you'll see another one coming along here, which looks like a satellite, but it'll curve out the way. And then this thing will go after it, and it'll speed up and chase it. Right. So it's basically like looking at dogfighting. Right. That's what it reminded me of, but of course in space, or inner space, the ionosphere. Mm-hmm. I can see out probably 50 miles out into space, but no further.
Right. Okay, and you also mentioned that you've spent a lot of time looking at NASA photographs, one in particular that you were telling me about that features the space shuttle. So you just describe what this photograph...
I was going through literally thousands of photos of NASA through their website, looking for anomalies, and I did find quite a few. But I found one interesting one where the STS-88, which is the Columbia shuttle, the unfortunate one that didn't make it back, was just taking off, and it was a blue sky with a bit of cloud, but I noticed all these dots, and I thought, well, maybe they're just marks on the lens or something of the photograph, you know, on the camera. And I zoomed in on it, and you can actually see that a lot of them are spheres, and you can see the sun shining off them, like they're made of like a ball, like a metal structure, probably about the size of a small car, I'd say. And I noticed about 7 or 8 of these. Some, obviously, the sun was shining off, some weren't. So I emailed NASA about it. I didn't get a response back, but when I went back onto their site to look at more of their photos, I noticed that particular one had disappeared completely on the same section where it was before. All the other photos of the STS-88 were there, but that one wasn't. 2 months later, I was still looking through photographs. It came back, and I thought, that photo doesn't look right. But I'm sure it's the same picture that I had originally, and I noticed that, because it was just taken off, of course, the smoke and everything, and there was one seagull or bird or whatever it was, and that was all in exactly the same position, so I knew it was the same photograph. So I uploaded that onto my laptop, and then I zoomed in on it, and all the anomalies were gone, and it was just literally dark blue, as if they were putting it onto like a blue screen. And even the cloud that was going across behind the shuttle, they'd even airsprayed that out. Because there were so many anomalies, they just went over the whole lot. And if you zoom in really close, you can just make out one of these spheres that you didn't quite manage to completely cover, and you can just see the pixels of it.
Right.
And I obviously checked it with my other one, and yep, that's where it should have been. There it is, and there it sort of is. And all the others were completely gone, and I have these photos on my laptop.
And many people have commented on photographs of the moon that appear to have been airbrushed. Either of you know anything about that?
There is a crater called Aristarchus, I think that's correctly pronounced, and it's the, if you look at the moon, it's on the 10 o'clock position. It's very, very bright. And originally they seem to dull the photographs down, and it just looks like a big crater. But some of these ufologist guys in America have had these photographs taken of the moon with these special powerful telescopes, and you can actually see it looks like it's all lit up, like a bluey sort of light, as if there's something inside there projecting a light up.
Okay.
Which doesn't resemble the NASA original photographs.
Okay, and we've got, you know, just to kind of throw another factor into the pot, if you like, we've got the Gary McKinnon testimony, and he claims to have read secret NASA files which said that there were fleet-to-fleet transfers of non-terrestrial officers, and it named the ships that they were transferring to and from, right. And he couldn't find them in any Navy ships, so he assumed that they were undisclosed military ships in space. Anyone have any comments or questions?
I have a theory. It just came to me a couple of days ago. Out of nowhere, I've got nothing to back it up with. It was just a fleeting thought. They're collecting lots of gold, and gold is now the in thing to invest in. You need gold to have a space program because it insulates against radiation and solar flares and all that sort of thing. It's also used to build telescopes in space. And there's been an awful lot of things on the BBC recently about telescopes in space and things like that, and we are building this, we are doing that. And it's little bits and pieces. So that could be a reason for
there are many theories as to why they're actually wanting the gold.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think about the secret space program, David? I mean, you're ex-RAF. You've spent many years studying UFOs. I mean, do you think there's a whole load of technology up there in space that's undisclosed?
I think very likely, yes.
You think likely?
Yeah.
Okay.
And just the thing about the Gary McKinnon, I happen to be friends with his mother, Janice Sharp, she's a film director, and I spoke to her only the other night, and I was asking her about this, what Gary found, and I said, obviously for the record, did you really see this? And he did. But unfortunately, he has problems remembering the names of the ships and the pilots.
Right.
But we think that the list that he found of off-world pilots, which we assume are groomed Top Gun pilots from Miramar, they're grooming and using up there with these craft, is what Ed and me see. And they're up there protecting the planet from something. Okay, so that's what it looks like to us, anyway.
Okay, from the night vision. Okay, so you're saying that there's a conflict up there. I mean, obviously, you know, we haven't presented this evidence. We're speaking a bit speculatively.
You know, when something runs after something and chases it.
Right. So you think that the Earth-based craft, our craft, are good guys protecting?
Yeah.
I mean,
that's what it looks. I mean, I don't know for certain. Right. I can only go by what I see, what I hear. Obviously, you've got to take a little bit of everything because not everything is true these days. I mean, you get false this and false that.
So, I mean, that would suggest then that the capabilities of Earth-based craft and ET craft are comparable. You know, you always hear that people say, well, they're 1,000 years more advanced than us, then they could just wipe us off the planet. You don't go along with that?
No, I think they're working alongside us. But I think there's also something else out there that wants to come in and perhaps do a little bit more, and then we're there just to say, come on, get out, sort of thing, go away. And that's what it seems like. They're just sort of patrolling it and just getting in there and just moving them away when they think there could be trouble. But
right. Okay. And where do you think they're actually launching these craft from if there's undisclosed?
That's a very good question. And from what I gather, we have more than one space station up there. and you can see them through your telescope if you...
This is undisclosed space stations, you
It's
think?
undisclosed, there's about 9 of them.
So would someone with a good telescope not see them?
Well, apparently they look like stars, but I've been told how to spot them. I have not done this yet, so I can only go by what I've been told.
What, do you think they're in orbit around the Earth? Or
No, they're further out.
They're further out? OK.
Yeah, quite a lot further out.
In the solar system, presumably?
But in the solar system, yeah.
So, I mean, as far out as another planet, or
well,
I mean...
the distance I'm not too sure of, but it is, yeah, about far as... About one of the distant planets, I don't know, far as Pluto, something like that.
Good evening. Great interest in what you're talking about there. Having recently just come back from the Exopolitics conference in Leeds, I just thought it might be of interest yourself that I did actually meet a lady who's never had any interest in UFOs her whole life. I think she's early 60s. And since last November, she started to see, it's in the Devon area, south of England, and she started to see what she sees as battles in the sky, and is actually digitally able to record what's going on. I think Richard might be aware of this as well.
Right, OK. I've not seen any footage, but obviously when we put this programme out, we will show some of Ed Grimsley's footage if we can get permission.
I'm in contact with her, and I'm hoping to have a good look at the footage.
Is this during the day?
It's mostly at night, but and during the day as well.
OK, yeah, because digital cameras will pick it up. Digital cameras, camcorders, anything like that will pick them up. But at night time, obviously, you need night visions to see them.
Absolutely. But she's saying she's seen actual conflict and debris scatter in the countryside.
Yeah,
so, you know,
Yes, Nick?
As regards to your fascinating remark that these binoculars, it seems to be a digital process that enables them to come into vision. Something similar happens with orbs. I was once listening to a lady speaking, and someone showed me a digital camera picture they'd taken of them. It was actually doing a crop circle and stuff, and there were orbs around her, right? And you couldn't see her, obviously you couldn't see looking at her, but it only became manifest when she clicked her digital camera, and then they allowed her orbs. And quite a lot of people find it. And that sounds a bit might be similar to
Actually,
what you're saying.
that's a good question, because I said that, first of all, before I even purchased my night visions. That I said to Ed, "Are you just seeing orbs?" And he said, "Well, I get those as well."
I think if you're using you're talking about just using a flash photography.
Well, yeah.
Because I think you've got to be very careful with dust particles, because if you use a flash with a normal camera...
These are spherical or circular.
Yeah, that's what a dust particle looks like when it reflects light.
That you see...
A lot of people
we occasionally
dust particles
see... we don't know what they are. They're like bubbles, like a see-through bubble. They can be anything from the size of a tennis ball to a big beach ball.
Right.
And they bob around, and they literally float, and then they bob up over houses and stuff like that. But they just sort of like bob around. It's really strange. I've only seen one.
And they're not visible with the naked eye?
No, absolutely not. You put your night visions down, they're not there. You go back up, and it's like, whoa, there it is.
So this is something which is in a low altitude, then?
Yeah, it's just literally across the road from you. You're looking and bobbing outside someone's garden, and then it'll just literally float up and go over the roof.
So you're looking at getting video technology added to your...
Yeah, to record what I've just said. But so if you go on the internet, loads of people are doing it, so...
I'd be quite
recording
like
it anyway.
To get that and show some on future shows.
But I will just say, I have also noticed a craft which changed its shape, literally transformed from one sphere into two. Then it shot out like a line, about so far, and then the line went back in, and then the thing just flew off like the Enterprise, like it was gone.
Any other final comment before we finish? Yes, sir.
Is it one shape versus another shape, or is it...
Yeah, it can be like an oval and a sphere, or...
it's versus, so that you can sort of determine that the round ones are going to attack the triangular ones, or whatever. You see what I mean?
Yeah, you can tell by looking at what's happening, because one will just come down, and then it'll sort of like try to hit the other one, and the other one will realise and then move out the way, and then it'll chase it.
Yeah, but a red one won't attack... a round one won't attack another round one.
Oh, I see what you mean, sorry.
Yeah.
No, I've not noticed that. I don't think it matters. Although, the oval ones, we call them delta wings or scout ships. They've got like a little tail on the end of it. They always seem to be like slightly oval. And they seem to be the ones that seem to be protecting.
Okay, well,
the planet.
Fascinating, and you know, we await to see the video images of that. But unfortunately, that's all we've got time for. So I'd like to thank David Cayton. Thank you, David.
Pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
And also thank you to the studio audience. Thank you very much indeed for coming. So until next week, remember, believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night.
A very quick look in the last day or so. Dr. David Clarke, who many people know, has become a sort of fixture now at the PRO at Kew, which is the Public Records Office, and he's sort of coordinated these batches of files that they release every, I don't know, 6 or 9 months. And he's done a sort of resume of what he considers to be the highlight and the most interesting items. So I've just printed that off and looked through them, and there are a few what I would call slight anomalies with facts.
Before you go to the first one, David, I just want to remind everyone about the 1957 Milton Torres case. That wasn't covered in these files, but this is where a US Air Force fighter jet pilot was ordered to shoot down a UFO flying around above Suffolk.
Yeah.
Now, that case is, well, Milton Torres has given a lot of information on that case, but I didn't realise until recently that in August 1956, a US Air Force fighter jet pilot was vectored to go and intercept a UFO.
Well, no, it was an Air Force, a Royal Air Force pilot.
Royal Air Force pilot.
But it was a USAF base in Suffolk called Lakenheath, who had this object on radar, which was obviously confirmed by one of the early warning radar stations called Neatishead, which is in Norfolk. And they scrambled
and witnessed the UFO. He became the first official MOD spokesperson on UFOs in 1971, I believe.
Yes, there was he was now at a rank of Air Commodore, which is quite a way up from when he was flying the Venom in '56, and he was the front man on a TV debate for BBC.
It was the Man Alive programme.
Man Alive programme, yes.
1972.
Yeah, 72. So.
But this guy Davis, he'd witnessed. Apparently, the radar report said that it was in front of him, and then suddenly it was behind him.
Yes, I mean that's pretty incredible, isn't it?
Can you just expand on that, David? What did the radar report say?
Well, he had it in front of him. He was chasing behind the UFO, obviously, at some point. Next thing, it disappears off his cockpit radar, and the air traffic control and the radar people, whether that was Neatishead or Lakenheath, said, "Oh, it's behind you." And he said, "Oh, no, it wasn't." "Oh, yes, it is." You know, the pantomime thing. And in a blink of an eye, the object had gone behind his jet and was trailing behind him.
And we'll see some evidence of that a little bit later on in the interview. Okay, so this guy appears on this TV show, but he seemed to put cold water on previous statements that he'd made in the past.
Yeah.
Once he'd become the government spokesperson.
Yeah. To give him, he was Air Commodore Davis, DFC, DSO, a distinguished Second World War fighter pilot. And after he retired, he joined the MOD as a civilian. He died in 1986, and he had 2 personal UFO experiences, one while flying a Spitfire in 1944, and of course the second one in the scrambled RAF Venom fighter in August 1956. Anyway, they obviously had some discussion about the politics of this programme, and despite his previous first-hand experiences of intercepting or seeing 2 UFOs, they came up with this sort of governmental UFO policy in a pre-recorded studio debate. So in other words, it was pre-recorded, so they were making sure what was said was fitted in with what the MOD wanted to say. Now, whether he personally felt this or not, which is a bit strange considering his personal experiences, and it says here, the policy, the MOD policy, as a result of, this is inverted commas, the need felt by many people for a new mythology, and hence their willingness to believe that natural things or events may have mysterious or extraterrestrial origins. 2 RAF Venom fighters from RAF Waterbeach in Cambridgeshire to intercept, just like the Milton Torres case.
Very similar.
Just a year before. Although I couldn't get any information from the MOD, having filed the Freedom of Information Act on the Torres case, because they said they didn't have any records of that incident, and here we are on this release of documents. It's a 1956 case. So
this is Flight Lieutenant, we think he was, Davis,
yes,
who witnessed and got a lock-on of the UFO.
Yes, he was the pilot of one of the Venoms, yes.
So can you tell us what he said about the dynamics that he viewed on his radar of this UFO?
That's not actually in the report. Well, it might be. I don't, but not in the detail I've got here. But he certainly got a radar lock-on, and he took some footage on his what they call a gun camera. And this was shown actually to a Nick Pope predecessor, a fellow called Ralph Noyes, who was on the UFO desk when it was called DS8, I think. In 1970, he was shown a secret briefing of various UFO footage, including this footage taken by Flight Lieutenant, or it might have been a flying officer, Davies, in 1956, in August 56.
Do you know if that footage has been released, David? Or?
Ooh, I shouldn't think so.
Okay. and apparently this Davis, who was flying the craft, Welcome to Richplanet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. This week I will be presenting the fourth and final audience discussion show, and the subject on the agenda is the secret space program and UFOs. Joining me for the discussion is the man you can't keep off richplanet.net, the unsung hero of modern-day ufology, possessing a mind of useful information, veteran UFO researcher David Cayton. Welcome, David.
Thank you very much, Richard.
Now, 2 weeks ago, we had another one of these releases of government secret files, and I think if you watch my show, you'll be aware of my opinion of them. I believe that they're nothing more than disinformation, because there are no top secret files in these files, and I'm fairly sure there are UFO files which are secret. But you've had a look at them, David, and you wanted to highlight a couple of very significant points in them.
Yes, I've only had